Hello, everybody. Today we are in reading 66 of the Essential Jesus series, and today we are in Mark chapter 1, verse 29 to 39. So I'm going to read that section to you and then we'll unpack it. Diving straight in then, from verse 29. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases, drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, that's the next morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone's looking for you." But Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages so that I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. So by way of introduction, starting a new section, looking at the prayers of Jesus, and the writer of our devotional says a few words just before we get into the devotional on this section, introducing the whole area of Jesus and prayer. And he makes this point that when you think of prayer and Jesus, very often the go-to passage is the Lord's Prayer. Remember when the disciples asked him, "Teach us to pray," and he gave them the Lord's Prayer. And they perhaps asked him because they realized how pivotal and important prayer was in the life of Jesus. And they saw him conducting miracles and all sorts of amazing things, and perhaps realized that prayer was the engine that sort of drove everything. And they saw his relationship with Father fostered through prayer. So in response to their question, of course, in Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 to 13, and Luke chapter 11, verse 2 to 4, he gave them the Lord's Prayer. But it didn't end there. He continued to kind of model other things through his prayer life. And the disciples would have seen that and learnt from it. And in this passage, they see Jesus going to a solitary place early in the morning and praying. And the writer of our devotional pulls out various things for our attention. Firstly, he entitles this point, "He prayed whatever else was going on." Whatever else was going on. And there's plenty of other things going on, isn't there? Well, Jesus must have been exhausted. That's the first point. The day before was a really busy one. He goes to the synagogue, goes back to Simon and Andrew's house, but nothing is prepared for them when they go back. The kettle's not on, the bickies are not waiting. The woman of the house, Simon's mother-in-law, is sick with a fever in bed. And Jesus is called into action and heals her. And later on, the same day, the whole town turns up on the doorstep. I love the way they said that. Open the door and wallop, the whole town's there. So what does he do? Well, he takes time to see to their needs, to heal the sick and so on. Must have taken a long time, and he must have been exhausted doing that right into the night. Probably fancied a lie-in in the morning. But no, he makes time to pray. He gets up early when it's still dark, and prayer is the first thing on his mind. When you get up in the morning, what's the first thing on your mind? For me, it's just functioning. I'm like a scene from The Walking Dead. I'm a zombie. But the writer of our devotional asks us that question. What do you think of? Now, I'm not a morning person. I can barely sort of see the end of the bed, let alone anything else. But whether you're a morning person or an evening person, the point is, we make space to pray, don't we? Sometime during the day, whatever else is going on, because it's pivotal, because it's important. That's what we learn from Jesus in this passage. If he needed to do it, we do. It's like eating, it fuels your body. Prayer is fuel too. It fuels our spirit and our soul. And by the way, Jesus had to be not just a morning or an evening person, but it seems to me an all-day person, because he's always being called into action. But he finds a way of praying without distraction. He went to a solitary place. And our writer of this devotional says effective prayer very often means leaving behind the distractions of the day or of our life. Hard to do sometimes. We come into prayer sometimes absolutely laden with worries and concerns, not just for ourselves, but for others. And absolutely, now is no different, where it's hard to think about anything else apart from our worries sometimes. But we can bring those to Jesus, casting our burdens on him. If we can't leave our worries behind, we bring them to Jesus and lay them at his feet, don't we? There was great pressure on Jesus to get back into action, wasn't there? There must have been many stories that he'd heard of that are weighing heavily on his mind. But early next morning, the disciples found him. And the first thing they did was to urge him back into action and say, hey, come back, there's people looking for you. But his replies is really interesting. He says with utter certainty, no, we're moving on to another town. Our work here is done. And he says that so definitely coming out of prayer. Was his time of prayer a place where he sensed the will of God and it gave him that sense of purpose? It might have been. I think it probably was. And he realizes that it's time to move on. The disciples will learn that prayer helps us to know what God's will is. Our writer says that Jesus' mind and heart were always focused on doing his Father's will. He was always praying, sometimes privately, sometimes formally, sometimes in the middle of action. And we can do the same. We can keep up a dialogue with God, chat to him about what's going on, casting our burdens on him. And he can take it because he's God. And that's what prayer is at its heart, isn't it? It's simply talking to God about whatever's on your heart. And the writer encourages us to experiment with perhaps a different approach to talking to Jesus today. Perhaps if you're alone, pray out loud. Try a different posture or position. Go outside, look at the sky as you pray. Take a prayer walk. Mix it up. And we end with these thoughts. He asks us to apply these thoughts. How could you make prayer less of an activity and more of a lifestyle? And we pray, Father, in spite of all the distractions and worries, my heart's desire is to deepen my relationship with you. Show me how I can do that today through prayer. So we'll leave it there. Thank you for listening, and God bless. Bye for now.